I da ding die ding die, I da ding ding die, I da ding die ding die, dee die ding ding die, I da ding die ding die, I da ding ding die, I da ding die ding die, dee die ding ding die. Oh, 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 I, did, oh, I, did, I, the ding 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 die, I, the ding ding die, I, the ding 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 die, ding 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 die, I, the ding 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 die, I, the ding ding die, I, the ding 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 die, ding 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 die, ding ding die, I, die, oh, I, die, ding die, ding, I, ding die, I, oh. I nine 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 oh I nine 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 oh I nine 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 I nine 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 I nine 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 I nine 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 I the ding nine ding nine, I the ding nine nine, I the ding nine ding nine, ding nine ding nine nine, ding nine nine, I nine, oh I nine ding nine, I nine, oh I nine ding nine nine. Okay, this week's parsha is called Vayigash. And in this parsha, Yosef finally reveals himself to his brothers. He is the viceroy of Egypt. He's the ruler of Egypt. And this whole time, his brothers do not know that this person is their actual brother, Yosef. And he did this in order to move them to do complete tshuva, to completely repent for their selling of him. And in this week's parsha, Yehuda, Judah approaches him and offers to exchange himself for his brother Benjamin. Benjamin has been taken by Yosef, and Judah had promised his father, Yaakov, that he would return Benjamin. And when he saw that he couldn't, so he offered himself in exchange for Benjamin's freedom. And when Yosef heard this, it says he could not hold back, and he finally revealed himself to his brothers. What then transcribes is that he tells his brothers to go back because the famine is going to last for another 5 years. And they should go back and bring their father down to Egypt, and he'll take care of everyone. So when he goes, when the brothers go to tell their father that after 22 years of at least Yaakov thinking that he was dead, Yosef is alive. So the text says when they told him that he was alive, it said Yaakov didn't believe them until he saw the wagons that Yosef had sent in order to transport everyone down to Egypt. And then it says, and the spirit of Yaakov was revived. So we want to understand exactly what that means, and a midrash that comes to explain something between the lines here. So Rashi tells us, what does it mean his spirit was revived? Is the Shekhinah, the divine presence, returned to Yaakov. And the Aramaic explains that the spirit of prophecy returned to Yaakov. So what caused the spirit of prophecy to leave Yaakov? So we're told in the Talmud, the sages say that prophecy only can occur in a state of joy. Only when there's joy can there be prophecy. And Yaakov was mourning for his son for 22 years. And we're told the whole 22 years, the spirit of prophecy, that God's presence had left him. But now that he hears it, his son is alive, the joy returned to him, and along with that, prophecy. Now, a midrash comes and explains something in between the lines here and says that something else happened that allowed Yaakov to believe that Yosef was alive. So what does the midrash says? So one of Yaakov's granddaughters, her name was Serach bat Asher. She was from the tribe of Asher. Her name was Serach. It says that she played soft, mellow music to Yaakov. And the words were, Yosef is still alive. Yosef is alive. And according to the Midrash, this is how Yaakov had in a sense never given up hope, because in Jewish tradition, we're told that we're supposed to mourn, but only up to a certain point. Now, it doesn't mean we ever forget or the person is not in our heart or our mind or our consciousness, but to overly mourn is not the Jewish way. And yet Yaakov was mourning for 22 years. And it was because there was something deep inside telling him that Yosef maybe is still alive. They never found a body. All they found was a cloak that had blood on it. So Serach bat Asher has been singing to Yaakov and calming him and giving him a little bit of hope. And so when the brothers finally come and tell him that he's alive, at first it was too shocking. But because of his granddaughters singing to him, he was somewhat prepared. So based on this, we're going to delve a little bit deeper into the quality of music and its connection with prophecy in particular, and also with joy. And it fits perfectly for this class. I'll be very honest with you. Shlomo contacted me just a few hours ago asking me to sub for him. And usually I invest quite a bit of time into preparing for a class. So I'm thinking, how am I going to connect this parsha to song? Because at the beginning, I didn't remember this whole beautiful midrash about her singing to Yaakov. And my son was here, he works with me. And he reminded me, he said, oh, it's perfect. Serach bat Asher. It fits perfectly in. And then it turns out in one of the books that I've written, I actually wrote a whole piece about this. But it was just at the beginning, I was thinking, what am I going to talk about? So it worked out perfectly. So let's delve a little bit into the connection of music and prophecy. So we already said that the sages have told us that without joy, there can be no prophecy. So there's a dynamite question to this, though. in general, we can understand that. We can understand that if we want to get in touch with a divine presence, then joy is like the best way. And there is nothing that brings us more joy than music. Music is a universal language of the soul that opens us up to levels of consciousness that we really couldn't access in hardly any other way. So the question, though, is if you read some of the prophecies of the great prophets of Israel, especially about that if the people didn't change their way, the destructions of the temple and exile, and you ask yourself, well, how do we understand their being in a state of joy and giving over these very, very graphic, very horrendous prophecies of what will happen? And unfortunately, they happened. They happened. So how could the prophet be in a state of joy? So there's a few ways to understand this. It doesn't mean that at the very moment that the prophet is giving over a prophecy, he's happy about the content of the prophecy. But anyone who's ever been in a leadership position, it could be very small or larger in the community, some position of leadership. We all know that a position of leadership, in most cases, is just trouble. So why do we do it? Why do people, and we're not talking about politicians now and people who are hungry for power. We're talking about people who truly serve their country or their community. What moves a person to take on very heavy burdens? And that is that doing what we feel is right and doing things that we can contribute to does bring us to a state of joy. So the prophet, when he first becomes a prophet and he's carrying God's message, this is a reason, a recipe for great joy in the soul, even though in the details of the leadership, it's just a lot of stress and a lot of a burden in many cases. But the joy comes from doing what is right, what applying the talents that we have to help other people. But we'll go back in general. Prophecy comes through joy. So I'm going to tell a few stories from the Bible that will give us more insight into this. The first king of Israel was King Saul. And when the prophet Samuel first came to him and said, God has appointed me to tell you that you are to be the first king, Saul absolutely would not believe it. He was a very, very humble person. At that point, he was a very, very humble person. And he couldn't believe that he was chosen to be king of Israel. So Samuel gives him a number of signs of what things that would happen to him to prove to him that what he's saying is really the word of God. And one of them is you will meet a band of minstrels, and they will be playing all kinds of musical instruments, and they will be prophesying. And you will join them, and you will prophesy also. And that's exactly what happened. Saul came upon this band they were really prophets. And the way that they entered into prophetic experience was through music. And they started playing. And it says that Saul was like brought into this spirit, and he began to prophesy also. And in fact, The book of Samuel says that the word got out and they said, is Saul among the prophets now? So that's one story. And another story about Saul that gives us a very deep insight into the quality of music is once he became king, he had what was called a troubled soul. And maybe in modern psychology, we would call it all kinds of other things. But in the Bible, he had like an evil spirit would come upon him. We could call it severe depression or bipolar, whatever we want to call it today. And his advisors said, maybe find someone who will play you music and that will calm your soul. And he said, yes. And who did they find to play music for Saul? David. David became the person who would come and play music and calm David's soul. Now, what's interesting is that they've done a lot of research in the last decade about the emotional, psychological effect of music, especially with the elderly. And they have found many elderly who are experiencing memory loss and very changed hormones and emotions and are in homes, not ideal places for many people. And there's a lot of depression there. And they've started using music as healing. But we see going all the way back to the Bible, they understood the healing properties of music. Now, another story is of Elisha. It's a very, very important story. Elisha was the main student of Elijah the prophet. And one time, this is written up in the book of Kings, 3 kings came to him, 3 Jewish, actually 2 Jewish kings and another king, because they were being threatened by another king. And the two of the kings who were, in Elisha's eyes, were very evil people. And one of them was righteous. And they wanted him to prophesy whether they should go into battle against this king that was threatening him. And Elisha, it just put him in a terrible mood. And he didn't want to do it because he just felt these 2 of the people there were just not worthy of receiving prophecy, receiving what he would give over in prophecy. But one of the kings was righteous. And so he decided that he would do this. But now he's in a terrible mood. So it says in the Bible, he said, bring me the musicians. And when the musicians began to play, Elisha was able to prophesy. So this is quoted very, very often. And it's known that throughout the age of the prophets, the great mystics in Israel, many, many great Kabbalists, that until this day, that music is used to enter into what's called prophetic experience. So here I want to say something very, very important, because the age of prophecy ended a long time ago. We don't have prophets today. But we're told that prophetic experience and what's called Ruach HaKodesh, divine inspiration, is still available. Today, what we would call prophetic experience is what we probably call today spiritual experience. And that's something that many people have experienced, something beyond the usual intellectual attainment that we can reach, some deep experience that we call spiritual experience. Now, it's interesting because in all these last portions of the Torah, dreams have played a very, very big part. Very, very big part. In fact, in the last month of portions, there have been 9 different dreams. The dreams of Jacob, the dreams of Joseph, of the butler, of the baker, of Pharaoh, many, many, many different dreams. And the sages say that dreams are 1/60th of prophecy. Now, that doesn't mean that every dream is prophetic. In fact, most dreams are not prophetic. They're not prophetic. But there are dreams that are prophetic, and many, many people, you don't have to be a prophet to have a dream about something that is going to happen that actually happens. It's not that rare an occurrence, but when it happens to us, it really leaves its mark on our consciousness. So here, if we're following, we're like bringing together the idea of music, the idea of joy, and the idea of prophecy all together. Now, we could put in 2 other activities, and the lines between them are purposely very gray. And one is prayer. That prayer has the ability to be a very, very joyous experience. It can be a prophetic experience. And prayer, when co-joined with music, takes on even a greater degree of spiritual insight. Now, one other very, very important event that is connected to music is during Sukkot. Every day of Sukkot in the temple, there was a celebration called Simcha Beta Shoeva, which means the joy, the event, the joyful event of drawing. What were they drawing? Every day of Sukkot, they would go down to the spring. It still exists in Jerusalem. The spring where was the water source for ancient Jerusalem. And they would bring some water up to the temple. And all night, they would be celebrating through music. And in the morning, they would pour the water on the altar as a sign of our prayer for rain. For those who know, in Israel, there basically is no rain for 6 months, completely dry, from approximately May through October. Sometimes it could rain in September, one rain. Basically, half the years there's no rain. And in the rainy season, we have to have the rain. So this ceremony was called the joyful event of drawing. And it was clearly that they were drawing the water. But the Gemara asked, the Talmud asked, what were they drawing? Now they knew that they were drawing water. Nonetheless, rhetorically, they asked, what were they drawing? And they answered, Ruach HaKodesh, divine inspiration. And we're told that anyone who never witnessed the joy of this celebration has never seen joy. And it went on every night during Sukkot. And Jonah the prophet, we're told that he became a prophet through this event, this celebration. He reached the level of prophecy. So I'm mentioning this because music was an absolutely essential, integral part of the temple experience. every day the Levites would be playing music and singing. And it was part of the whole experience. When someone came to the temple, not only were they experiencing what was said to be the most beautiful building in the world, but that's like outside superficial. In the first temple, there was an ongoing presence of God. The second temple lacked that direct presence of God, but because of the beauty of the place, the ambience, and the music, it was an ecstatic experience. If anyone has been to the Western Wall, so it's not guaranteed, but many people have very deep spiritual experiences at the Western Wall. But if we think about it, the Western Wall was not actually part of the temple. It was a retaining wall. Like, let's say this is the wall, and the Temple Mount stood on top, and then you had the temple up here. So what's the Western Wall is basically a retaining wall of the Temple Mount. So if people come to the Kotel today and have a deep experience, which many, if not most people do, how much more, like 1,000 times more, coming into the temple and all of the energy that was there, and music was a big part of it. There's so much more that we could say here. There's so much more we could say. Just as a review, we got into this whole subject is because this is what, in a sense, gave Jacob even a tiny bit of hope that maybe his son was alive. And then when he heard, it was only because he had been built up through the music to be able to accept. I mean, it almost sounds in the Torah like he almost had a heart attack when he heard this news. It was so shocking. So music is a source of tremendous joy. It connects us to our deepest emotions. It connects us to, in many cases, to other people. We all know the experience of making music or being part of a musical experience with other people, how it draws people together. And ultimately, it connects us to God and to higher levels of consciousness and to soul. So I want to give everyone a bracha, a blessing, that we can truly experience this type of joy through music. I realize there's one other piece I want to put in here, the last minute that we have, and that's the role of meditation. So we're told that meditation also was an absolute integral part of a prophet coming to the place of prophecy. But here we see that it's really meditation and music together. So most people, we all love music. Everyone loves music. Everyone listens to music. But most of the time, we're listening to music in the background. When we're driving in the car, we're bored. We're at home and we're doing chores or whatever. And we have music and we're enjoying it. And it's great. But there's a whole other level of meditating to music. And this is, I suggest this to everyone. We're just a week after Hanukkah, but every night of Hanukkah, when we light our candles, we sit by the candles and we put on instrumental music, very mellow instrumental music. And we just meditate on the candles with the music being the vehicle to really open us up to a deep level of spiritual experience. So I want to bless everyone. Try it out. Try it out. Not just listen to music in the background. I'm not talking about like, like heavy rock and roll kind of music. That also brings great joy. But here I'm talking about like meditative type of music. Doesn't have to be classical. There's lots of beautiful, beautiful music out there that can bring us to the highest level.